Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another webinar series by Be My App. Today we have Brian Advent, and he'll be speaking on auto layout. We'll be starting in a few moments, so just get ready, and we'll be starting very shortly. So hi folks, once again, welcome to this webinar series by Be My App. Again, my name is Fernando, and it's awesome having you all here. Today we have Brian Advent, iOS instructor, and so without further ado, I want to pass it to Brian. So Brian, you have the mic.
Thank you, Fernando, and welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about auto layout and about best practices related to auto layout. And actually there is quite an interesting story behind that, and we are at the moment focused at quite a few changes like working with stack views. So let me just quickly show you in that window what we are going to create today. So here's a little demo application where we'll just use auto layout and stack views to arrange some views on the screen. And also we will make it happen that by rotating the device, we will actually get a completely different layout. We get different aspect ratios for the views that we're going to present. So this is quite interesting because we are going to do that completely in code, and that will give you a deeper understanding of how actually the auto layout constraints that you can set work together. So, and the other thing that we're going to create today is a simple layout like this, where we have an image view and we have some labels and some text fields and a text view, but we will only set 4 auto layout constraints to create this complete interface by just using the UI stack view that was introduced with iOS 9. So let's just get started with this little example here, and then we will move on to creating stuff in code. So
Brian, just one second. Folks, if you have any questions for Brian at the end, you can just post them in the YouTube comment section, so we'll moderate them at the end. Brian, please continue.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando. So we will move to the main storyboard now in a second, and if you're interested in getting those code files, you will find them on my website. I will give them to you there in a zip file, and you can download them after this webinar. So let's just continue, and you can follow along if you want. If you have any picture that you want to insert here, just drag them into your assets folder in Xcode. This is just a single view application template, and we are good to go and get started. So the first thing I want to do is bring up an image view here. So I'm just placing it here somewhere. I don't have to worry about the exact position, and I will give it a square form factor by entering also the same width and the same height. And to make things a little easier for me, because we have this view controller here, with the size of 600 by 600 pixels, which is not really an iPhone or iPad size, I can click on my view controller and choose the attributes inspector and set the size to an iPhone with 5.5 inch, and that has actually no consequence for your later app layout. It's just for us here in the simulator to make better in Interface Builder to make better design decisions. So what we can do here is now placing the image view somewhere here. Let's bring up a label. Let's call this first. Let's bring up a text field and just move it somewhere here. And I already told you that to create this look, we won't set a lot of constraints. That means that we can just set this quick and dirty to the screen here, and don't worry really about the width or something like that. So let me just copy that 2 times. Let's enter middle and last here. So this is what we have now. I'm going to position it here a little. And then we will bring up a text view. And we will position that here. Make it a little bigger. And just to get it to be a little more visible, we will change the background color to a light gray color or whatever you like, just so that we can see it later on in the process of creating some stack views for that layout. And the last thing we want to do is bringing up some buttons, just 3 of them, just copying it and pasting it. One for save. You can actually write whatever you want into them because we won't give them any function, but it's just a little nicer. So this is actually our layout in a quick and dirty manner. And what we want to do now is creating a layout of stack views. And stack views were introduced in iOS 9, and we will have a look at them in a lot more detail when we're working with them. So if we now select those 2 items, this first label and the text field that is going to be associated with it, then we can actually place these 2 items into a stack view. And there is a nice little control here at the bottom right of our Interface Builder window, right next to the pin and everything else related to auto layout. And when I click this button, which says stack, then I have placed both of my items into a stack view. And now it's interesting what we actually get here in our attributes inspector. We get a lot of things that we can adjust here, like the axis, alignment, distribution, spacing. So first of all, the axis, it was guessed by Xcode already that we want to position these 2 items horizontally. So it told our stack view that we just created. Let me just bring up my view controller scene here because it's sometimes hard to click on those stack views. So as you can see, the axis was already set to horizontal, and we will later see that Xcode or Interface Builder automatically determines what we actually want. But now let's change it to vertical for a second, and as you can see, the stack view lays out our 2 elements now vertically, and if I change that back to horizontal, it does it again horizontally. And we can specify, for example, a spacing of 8 here. And this will move the text field 8 pixels away from our label. And to determine the size of these user interface elements, it actually uses the so-called intrinsic content size of each element. Like, for example, from this label, its intrinsic content size comes from the number of letters or characters that are put into it. So this is our first stack view that we have created. And now we will move on and create another stack view with these 2 elements. So I'm just moving on here to here. And now we have 3 pairs of text fields with labels. And that's already very good, and we can work with them later. But now we will also place those 3 stack views again into a stack view. Remember that these three pairs all were laid out horizontally, but now we have selected three stack views that are positioned vertically right below each other. And when I click on stack, then we have another stack view, and Xcode automatically determined that this should be vertical. So this is what we have now. This is our area of text fields, and also the area of labels. And now we will put this stack view and our image view. As you can see here, I've selected the stack view and the image view, and I will put this again into a stack view. And this was again laid out horizontally. So the next thing we want to do is actually dealing with those buttons at the bottom. We will not touch our upper stack view here for the moment. We will simply concentrate on the buttons here. So again, I select all of them, and by clicking on the stack button, they're automatically put into a horizontal stack view. Very cool. And all we need to do now is, if you have a look at our scene here, we have our view, and within this view there's just our text view and two stack views. And now let's take all of those elements and put them again into one root stack view. So that's it. I will now move that to the center here, and now we will set our first constraint. And we don't need to set constraints for a huge amount of user interface elements here. But for this root view controller, we actually need to set constraints. And if you've never set constraints before, that doesn't matter. You will learn that in a second. There are actually different ways. So what we can do is press Control on our keyboard and select the stack view right here and move it with Control pressed to our view. Then we get different options for setting the constraints, like a leading space to container margin, which would be the space from the border of our, from the left border of our stack view to the container margin, which is our view. But we won't use that actually at the moment. What we want to use is this little icon here at the bottom, which says pin. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm clicking on pin now, and this brings up this nice little field with options where we can add new constraints and also choose if we want to activate them with by clicking on these symbols. So what I want to do is I want to add a constraint to the top which has a distance of 20 pixels. I want to activate those two constraints, which says that we want to have 0 distance between the left and right content margin and container margin, and we want to set a distance of 20 pixels to the bottom and also activate that. Now, if I just were to click now on Add for Constraints, then if I did not position my view correctly, then that would mean that I get some errors or warnings, but that doesn't matter. We can simply create or tell our interface builder that we want to update all frames in the container as soon as we add our 4 constraints. So I simply click on Add for Constraints now, and this changes a lot of things. As you can see, there is no image view anymore. There is just our 3 labels with the text field, and our text view is gone as well. And this actually happens if you're working with stack view at the moment. Maybe in the future this is going to change, but you have to just to accept that that things disappear as long as you did not enter the correct information or provide the correct information for the stack views. So now let's continue and create our user interface a little better and make the necessary adjustments so that our user interface really works. So to do that, we will start with opening up our stack view here on the left. And remember that we have created 3 stack views for our first, middle, and last name, and we will now make some adjustments to those stack views. So I will simply select all of them at once, and what we can do is first of all check if they are horizontally laid out, and that is the case. And then what we also want to do is for the alignment, we can now choose different options. Like we can choose that our elements in the stack view should be aligned to fill at the top, center, or at the bottom, or they can be aligned with the first baseline. That's what we want to choose here. And as you can see, as soon as we did that, something else happened, and our text view and our image view reappeared magically. And we can also change the distribution, like we can choose fill or fill equally, fill proportionally, equal spacing, and equal centering. And we will see some of those options later on. But what we can also do is add the spacing, and we want the spacing of all those elements to be 8. So as you can see now, every element or every text field is now 8 pixels away from the label. So the next thing we want to do is actually choosing the stack view, which is so these 3 stack views, the first, middle, and last name, are contained in this stack view, and we want to make some changes to these names stack view, if you want to call it that way too. So as you can see here, it's laid out vertically. We want to choose fill for the alignment and also fill for distribution. But again, here we want 8 pixels of distance between each element. And as you can see, as soon as I did that for that single stack view, the change automatically applied here. So this is pretty great. Now let's choose the stack view or our upper stack view, which contains the image view and also our labels and text fields. And what we want to do here is also just enter a spacing of 8. So now we have a nice distance between our text field, between our labels and the image view. And now let's continue to the buttons at the bottom, which we have here. And what we want to do here, again, is change the alignment to first baseline. And this has no immediate effect on the layout here in Interface Builder, but what we want to do as well is choose fill equally. And that nicely distributes our buttons here. And we want to set the spacing again to 8. All right, and now the last thing we need to do here with these adjustments is choosing our root stack view. And as you can see at the moment, the alignment is set to center, which means that all the elements positioned in this stack view are centered, but we want our alignment to be fill. And this changes everything. As you can see here, makes a huge difference now, and our layout much more resembles what we have seen at the beginning. So this is pretty great. But we will also make the spacing, we will set that to 8 so that we have a nice distance between all of our elements, or all of our user interface elements. So as you can see, using stack views might seem a little bit tricky, but the options that you have here are quite easy to understand. When you have a look at leading and centering and trailing, then you can see that if I choose that stack view and actually decide the alignment to be leading, then everything will be put to the left. Or when I choose trailing, then the exact opposite. And center, you've just seen that. But what we want to do is fill. And now I told you earlier that we have to set some constraints. And you could think about that for a moment, what constraints there should actually be when we have a look at that picture. So actually, these 3 text fields, they all have the same width. And this is not automatically determined by the stack view. As well as our image here, this has an aspect ratio of 1:1, and this is also not determined by our stack view. So what we actually need to do is set those constraints. And we can do that right here in our view controller scene. I will just open all of our 3 stack views. And what I want to do is I want to choose the text field, the first text field. And now I press Control and drag to my second text field here and say equal widths. And now their width is equal. And I will do the same thing with the third text field. And I will also tell it that the widths should be equal. And now we are, again, a little step closer to our finished user interface. And now let's choose the image view. and actually press Control. And now this is the third way to create actually constraints, user interface constraints with Interface Builder. And I simply press Control on my keyboard again, and I drag kind of in a diagonal way here, and I just choose aspect ratio. And if your image somehow got distorted, this happens when you have inserted an image first, or if Interface Builder just wanted it to be a little different. You saw that Interface Builder sometimes decides strange things when working with stack views. But if that happens, simply open the size inspector, and there you have now this constraint, and you can enter the aspect ratio by changing the multiplier here. So you could you could add 3 to 4 or 16 to 9 or whatever you like, but we're going to work with a 1-to-1 aspect ratio here. So that just as a quick hint. And now I think we could actually insert our food picture here. I already added it. And as you can see, now something strange happened. We have the aspect ratio of 1-to-1, but the user interface doesn't look as expected anymore. And this is due to the so-called content hugging and the resistance, the compression resistance that is related to auto layout. And we still have to think about content hugging and compression resistance. And if you've never heard that before, content hugging expresses the desire of a user interface element to stretch, whereas the content compression resistance is the desire of a user interface item to shrink, actually. So content compression, you have to think about shrinking, and hugging, you have to think about stretching. And what we can do now is we can adjust the content hugging and the compression resistance priorities. And to do that, we will begin with the image view. And if we click on the image view and click on the size inspector, then let's scroll down here, and then you will find some priorities. You will find a content hugging priority and the content compression resistance priority. So this looks kind of complicated, but it isn't that complicated. We have, if we click on that little arrow here, you see that there are 3 default priorities. There is a priority required, high, and low. And when we're talking about content hugging, a low priority means that this item wants to stretch a lot. And a high priority means that it doesn't really want to stretch. And when we talk about content compression resistance, a low value means that this item wants to shrink, and a high value means that it doesn't want to shrink. So we will have to adjust this according to our user interface that we want to create. So let's choose the image view, and let's insert a horizontal hugging here, not of 251, but of 250. I will explain to you what that means in a second. And also for the vertical content hugging, let's insert 250. And now for the horizontal resistance, let's add a very low value of 48. And also for the vertical resistance, let's add 48 here. And you see that it already shrinks a little. And now let's move on to the text view. And as you can see here, the text view has quite the same content hugging priorities as the image view. So we have 250 here, and we have 250 here. But let's now add, let's keep the 250 for the horizontal hugging, but let's go to 249 for the vertical. And this means now that we have a value lower than the value of our vertical content hugging priority of the image view. But let's continue. We will keep here a content compression resistance of low, so 250 in horizontal direction and also in vertical direction. And as you can see, that did the trick, because when we set the vertical content compression, we told the text view that it wants, or it should have, a greater desire to shrink, or to the text view wants to shrink a lot more, or it tells the so let me do that again. We tell the text view that it should expand a lot more, and this pushes our image view a lot more together, which results in this layout. But because the stack view itself does not hug too much to the text fields, for example, we have to enter some more priorities here for the three text views, for the text fields. So let me select those three, and we will now enter a horizontal hugging of 48 for them. And let's keep 250. Let's add a little less here, 749, just to be on the safe side, and 750 here. So this is actually all we need to do with content hugging and with compression resistance. And now it's actually time that we run our application in the simulator. And when we are dealing with that stuff, I highly recommend that we use the 6S Plus simulator, since when we go to landscape, then we have almost an iPad-like experience here. So let me run that and change the screen just in a second. So app is running. And I'm going to switch now. So let's see. Here's the simulator. And as you can see now, our layout looks just as we expected it. And if we just turn around our user interface, I don't know if this works with the screen sharing, but if I move to landscape, then we have a nice user interface. And I will
Currently, I only see your avatar.
Okay, so I will just it works. I could see that that it actually works, and I would just share with you the screenshot again. So actually, we got this result, and we also got the. Let me try that again. Maybe it works this time. So here we go. So this should be the result in landscape. And this is what we did by simply using a stack view and not too many auto layout constraints, because if you remember, we only set auto layout constraints for the root for the root stack view, and we told him that we want a distance of 20 pixels to the top and 20 pixels to the bottom, and some 0 to the leading margin, which is here. We don't want to put things directly to the edges in normal circumstances. So these are the leading and trailing edges, and these were the first constraints that we set. And the last constraints that we have added, they were here for the text fields, to tell them that they should be equal in width. So this is a pretty simple approach to laying out user interfaces. So let's get back to Xcode, which is here. All right. So this was completely done using Interface Builder. Now let's have a look at how we can work with the stack view and also with all the layout constraints in code. And actually, there were quite some improvements with iOS 9 to actually add all the layout constraints in code. Before that, it was quite hard to do that, and now it's really, really simple. So let me just add another view controller to our project here, and we will continue to work with this one. So in the final project that you will get, you will have all view controllers, all screenshots, and all assets in one project. So I will also create another view controller file. I simply press Command-N, create a new Cocoa Touch class. And this is going to be a subclass of UI view controller. And this is my second view controller. So let's just add that. And let's connect this view controller with our view controller here in the storyboard by simply opening the identity inspector and adding that second view controller to as a class here, as a custom class. And then we are finished here with this first view controller. And we will simply drag this little arrow here to the second view controller, just to tell it that this is the initial view controller that we want to run when launching the application. So here we go. Let's go into this view controller file, and I will now make some space here in the view.load function. And right above that, we want to add some properties. So I told you that we want to work with stack views and with some views, so we will simply use image views here to give them some color. We will have a button. And these are all the elements that we will have. So we have 3 image views here. We will give them a background color. And we want all of those image views to have a different size depending on this one in the center. So we want this one to be a little smaller and this to be a lot smaller than the red one. And we want to have this press me button. And if we switch to the landscape mode onto the regular size class, then we want all of them to be squared. So we are also going to work with size classes here, which were introduced in iOS 8, and they are, especially in code, a great way to work with user interface orientation changes. But we will see that in a moment. So first of all, what we want to do is create a stack view here. So this is simply going to be a UI stack view. And this is our first object. Then we will have 3 image views. So we have image view 1, just using here UI image view. And I will copy that 2 times. So let's call that image view 2 and 3. And the last thing that we have is a button. So let me call it just button, UI button, and initialize that. And then we will have 2 arrays of layout constraints for 2 of our size classes. So let's create a regular constraints array, which is going to be an array of NS layout constraints. And we will have a compact constraints array. So again, an array of NS layout constraints. Oops. Very good. So this is what we have now. And the first thing that we want to do, everything that we have just adjusted in Interface Builder regarding the stack view, like the axis and the alignment, we can also set that in code. So let's do that here in view.load. Simply use our stack view and set the axis to horizontal. Then let's think about the alignment. And the alignment was, in our case, center. So as you can see here, here, they are distributed to fill, and we will set that in a second. But if we only had 1 image view here, this would be centered. So let's add the stack view here and set the distribution to fill. And the spacing between each element within the stack view, let's set that to 20. So as you can see, every element that everything that we could change in Interface Builder also is changeable in code as well. And now all we need to do is add our stack view as a subview to our view. So that's all there is to it. But now let's see how we can actually add elements to our stack view. In code, it was in Interface Builder, it was quite simple. In code, it's also simple, but might not what you expect. So let's use our image view, our first image view. Let's add a background color so that we can distinguish each image view. So this is going to get you a color. Let's choose orange color, image view 2. Background color, let's use maybe a green color. And for image view 3, let's use, again, a black color, something you can, of course, change that to whatever you like. Now let's also use the button, set the title to click me, or I think I said touch me for the state normal. And let's also give that a background color. So let's say it's going to be black. Now we have adjusted everything. We just need to add our button to our view. So as you can see, we add the button and the stack view directly to the view, but the 3 image views, these we want to add to our stack view. And instead, when I choose my stack view here, as you can see, we can add a subview, but that does not work. When you work with a stack view, you have to call add arranged subview. And then we can choose image view 1, and then we can copy that and add our image view 2 and 3 as well. So this is all we need to do to set up our user interface. But we did not set constraints yet. So let's do that. And let's write a special function for that. So let's just write setup constraints as a function. And give some space here. And let's also call this function at the end of view.load. And now when we're working with user interface elements, constraints, and with the stack view, or especially when we work with constraints in code, it is important that we do one thing, and that is that we deactivate translates auto-resizing masks into constraints. This is automatically done by Interface Builder when you create constraints, but in code, we have to manually set this to false. So how can we set constraints? So let me show you just a quick demo on how we would set a constraint here with Interface Builder. So I have a button, for example, and I want this button to have this distance from the top. So what I would do is, for example, press Control on my keyboard, drag to the top, and add vertical spacing here. This is all I need to do. Or I use the pin menu or whatever I like here. So doing that in code is now pretty similar to what we can do in Interface Builder. And I'm going to show you how that works. So we use the stack view, and we choose its top anchor. And now all we need to do is call constraint equal to anchor. And then we can choose different versions of that method. And now we want to select the second one, which also gives us the possibility to add a constant, which is the distance between our top anchor that we are going to choose. So I choose the view and its top anchor. And sometimes auto-completion does not work here, but don't worry about that. So we have the top anchor, and then we will set a distance of 50 to that. And now to activate that constraint, we simply call the active property and set this to true. And since I don't need that, let me just make our code space a little bigger here. And let's do the same thing for the leading space or the leading anchor. So again, let's use stack, leading anchor, and constraint equal to anchor. And this time we don't need a constant, since we are working with the layout margin and the leading layout margin, and this already has a distance from the left edge of the screen. So what we need to do is use the view and its layout margin, margins guide, and its leading anchor. And again, to activate the constraint, simply use active and set it to true. Next one is going to be the trailing anchor. So let's use the stack view again and the trailing anchor, and let's constrain that anchor again equal to an anchor without a constant. And this is going to be the view, the layout margin guide, and the trailing anchor. And let's activate it by setting active to true. So this is actually how you set constraints in code. And this is pretty simple, but as you can see, activating those constraints is kind of hard because you have always to write .active equals true. And I will show you how you can automatically activate a lot of constraints in a batch by simply using the regular and the compact constraints arrays that we have created. And that is quite important because if we have a look back at our user interface or at our interface builder and click on the size classes window here, then as you can see, we work with two size classes. This, for example, a compact width, which would apply to an iPhone in portrait. But we also work with the regular size class, which would apply to, for example, iPads in landscape, and also the iPhone 6 Plus in landscape. And because we have different constraints here, we have created those two arrays of constraints where we'll fill in different kinds of constraints that we're going to create in a second. And this will, of course, deal with our image views. And as I already told you, we have to deactivate this translates auto resizing mask into constraints. So let's use image view 1 and translates auto resizing and so on. And let's set this to false, copy it 2 times, and change the name here. And now we will simply use, let's start with the compact constraints. We'll use the compact constraints array and just append new constraints, because as you can see, when we click on constraints equal to anchor, what this function actually returns is an NS layout constraint. So you could also assign the results of this line of code to a constant or a variable if you want to continue working with this layout constraint later. So we are going to append them to our compact constraints array. So we will use image view 1, and we will adjust the width anchor here and constraint that equal to, and we will use constraint equal to anchor, and this time with a multiplier. So let's choose that one, and we want to use the image view 2 and its width anchor, and we want to use the multiplier of 0.8 here. So let me just copy that code again. Now we will use the image view 1, and again the image view 1 and a multiplier of 1.5 here. These values, just you can play around with them. This will give you different sizes here for the different image views, and I have just chosen those ones. So let me add some more here. So let's use the image view 2. I actually want to use the height anchor here. And now I want to height anchor of image view 2, and I want to constraint that to the height of image view 1 with a multiplier again of 1.5. And now let's just copy that again. This time let's use image view 3, its width anchor, and let's constraint that to image view 2 and its width anchor. Let's use 0.65, something like that. And let's insert that one last time. Again, image view 3, and this time again its height. And let's constraint that to its width. And let's point that let's multiply that with 1.5. So these are just some values, and again, you can play around with them, but not for the regular constraints. So let me just copy that and paste the whole code block here again. Let's add all of these to the regular constraints array as well. But instead of choosing different multipliers here, we will simply use 1 as a multiplier, and this will give us the squares that you have seen earlier. And that's it. And what we need to do at the end now is working with this press me button, and we will also give this one some constraints, and we'll use again the button, and we have to deactivate, you might have guessed it, the translates auto resizing mask into constraints. We have to set this to false, and then just as we would do with interface builder, we use the top anchor constraint equal to anchor, and again we might want to use a constant here because we want to have some distance to our stack view. So let's use the stack view and its bottom anchor. So, and add a constant of 50 here. So this would actually be the space between this between the edge of the red image view and here. So this would be the distance that we apply here. And then we have to set this to active and true. And then we also need, as you can see, when I have a look at the picture again, the button covers the whole width of our app screen. So let's use the button and the leading anchor constraint equal to anchor, and we don't need a constant here. We use, again, the view and its layout margin guide, and the leading anchor set active to true. And the last one, button and the trailing anchor and constraint equal to view layout margin guide trailing anchor and set active to true. And as you can see, I manually did that here, and we did not really activate any of those constraints yet, but that's what we are going to do now. Because the interesting thing is that at the moment, our application wouldn't really work because the constraints wouldn't be applied, at least not for our for all of these image views. So we want our user interface to change when we rotate our device. And since the introduction of size classes, we have a great delegate method that we can use. And this is called trait collection did change. So all we need to do here is actually call super and call trait collection did change previous trait collection. So this is what we need to do here. And then we can check if the trait collection and its horizontal size class is equal to regular. So this would be when we are in landscape mode. Then what we want to do is use NS layout constraint. Now we want to deactivate our compact constraint. So we simply call deactivate constraints. And now this function requires an array of NS layout constraints, and that is what we have created here. So we want to deactivate now the compact constraints. So every constraint that is inserted into that will be deactivated. So let's see what happens. Let's add compact constraints here. Use NS layouts constraint again, and what we want to do is activate other constraints, namely the regular constraints. And let's make an else block here. So again, NS layout constraint, activate constraint. This time we want to activate the compact constraints, and we want to deactivate the regular constraints. So let me run this application and change to the simulator in a second again. So I'm running. And here we go. I will change the window. So here we are. So this is what our user interface looks like in portrait. And if we now, let me turn it around again and start screen sharing again. Here we go. So share. And here we are. So this means that we have created an application with auto layout constraints completely by using code in a matter of minutes. It took maybe about 10 to 15 minutes to write that code. Let me switch back to Xcode. And also note that this is pretty amazing here. The trait collection did change in connection with the working with a complete set of layout constraints in an array. That allows you to predefine your complete layout within an array of NS layout constraints, and you can activate them and deactivate them as you see fit during your during the runtime of your application. So this is actually what I wanted to present to you now in this quick tutorial. So in 45 minutes, what we did was using stack views to lay out a little more complex user interface that really deals pretty well with different sizes. So this would work on iPhone 4S. This would work up to an iPad Pro with 12.9 inches. Of course, this wouldn't be not too nice, but it works, and the layout adopts perfectly. And here we have the same thing, but this time in code, which gives you a lot of freedom in dealing with animations, with complex layouts, and you can apply that to pretty amazing applications, I think. So now I think it's time that you can ask your questions.
All right, Ryan, that was awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm gonna just quickly type in the questions, so just so you can also have them as well. Let me just quickly grab them. 1 second, folks. Okay, let me see. Our first question comes from, did I pronounce this right? Sminkley. He asked, posting it right here. How does the view controller lifecycle affect coding or changing existing constraints? An example, when should be done and view did load, view will appear, or view did appear?
All right, this is a pretty good question because auto layout has kind of its own life cycle. So if we go into our
Brian, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you. So if we go.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right, can I continue?
Hi, Brian. Yeah, please continue. I had the video, the music was like the sound was going on and off. But please continue.
All right. So what I was saying is that actually the auto layout has kind of its own life cycle. So what we did was that we so let me just bring up the second view controller. We called setup constraints in view.load. But many of the constraints weren't really called here or activated here. In fact, they were activated when the trait collection did change. So this is where we actually activated our compact or regular size class depending on if the application starts in portrait or landscape mode. So this is called also add application launch. But there is also another function like update constraints or update view constraints that is called when actually something happens. So this is a good place to put things like when you call set needs display or sets needs update constraints or something like that. So trait collection did change is one of those, but update view constraints is also very important. But many of the constraints that you set can be set actually in when you at view in view.load. View will appear and view did appear is much too late. Then the user or the constraints should already be laid out.
Okay. Now question number 2. I have an app where users can decide in the settings to have some buttons in a stack view, or left or right. How would you go about switching a constraint from leading to trailing between them so the stack view switches sides?
Okay, let me just go through that where users can decide in the settings to have some buttons in a stack view on the left or right. How would you go about switching? So actually, I don't know if I understand that correctly, that buttons should change, like if they should be aligned to the left side or aligned to the right side. So if that would be the case, we can pretty easily accommodate that by choosing, let me just use one of our stack views here, which is this one, for example. And if I just were to change the alignment from first baseline to not last, just to bottom, for example, here, this would mean that we switch from top to bottom here. But what you can of course do is simply reverse the order of your user interface elements. So if I choose the stack view here and reverse the order in which they are laid out, then this change is reflected in the user interface. In code, you could actually just remove those two the user interface elements and insert them in the sequence that you would like to have them visible in your user interface. I hope that this answers your question.
Okay, that's about the last question we have. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our auto layout series with Brian Admin. Brian, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I know you had a pretty hectic week with the WWDC. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And as always, Brian is going to send me the link to his website so you can download the zip. Where I'll probably just post it in the YouTube comment section. And if you guys want to rewatch this or have any questions, you guys can always reach to Brian himself. And with that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good day or evening, wherever you're at. Cheers.